First of all, many thanks to Annelies and to The Shift for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm also very happy to see that you are quite a lot. I read recently some articles that due to Corona, the attention for diversity and inclusion would be reducing in organizations, but that's clearly not the case amongst you. So that's really great to see. My very broad goal or objective of this presentation is to hopefully get you or give you some few insights, ideas in how organizations and leaders can contribute to a society in which we are a bit more united in our differences. I think it's a very clear challenge today. And I personally believe, and it's also something that we try to explain in our research, that creating diverse and inclusive organizations is good for business, that's clear, but it's really, really necessary to create diverse and inclusive organizations in order to be able to create a fully sustainable society. And I think it's very often forgotten, or it's very often not mentioned explicitly, but it's an important reason to create diverse and inclusive organizations. So I would like to give you in this presentation these new insights, or hopefully new insights in how to create or how to contribute to a society in which we are a bit more united by doing three main things. First of all, I would like to give you an idea or a new idea on how a holistic, diverse and inclusive organization could look like, on which types of domains a diverse and inclusive organization should focus. Secondly, I would like to look with you at what can be done at company level in order to be able to achieve these diverse and inclusive organizations. And then secondly, or third, sorry, I would like to look at what leaders can do, and actually what every employee in an organization could do in order to contribute to a diverse and inclusive organization. So let's start with the first thing: how could a diverse and inclusive organization look like? I would like to start with this quote that says, "Diversity and inclusion are really two sides of the same coin. Trying to cultivate either diversity or inclusion is like trying to split the coin and derive the same value." I think it's an interesting quote, because today, even though it's very difficult to imagine today that we are talking about diversity without mentioning inclusion in the same sentence or even in the same breath, and even though I think amongst us, everyone recognizes the importance of inclusion, in practice, the main focus of research, at least, but also I think in many organizations, is still to really manage diversity, to stimulate diversity. And by that, I mean to increase the diverse workforce numbers. But what this quote really illustrates very well, I think, is that in order to be able to attract a diverse workforce, in order to be able to retain your diverse workforce, and in order to benefit from your diverse workforce, it's really crucial, essential, key for organizations to put energy in a very intentional way in creating an inclusive, diverse, or no, an inclusive workplace culture. How can this be done? That's a difficult question. It's really not easy, that's clear. But we argue that it can be done by making sure that employees in your organizations do not experience barriers to 5 domains. So they shouldn't experience barriers to impartiality, to competence, to influence, to meaning making, and to health. So in a diverse and inclusive organization, all employees, regardless of the group to which they belong, they shouldn't be exposed to partial treatment. They shouldn't be exposed to, or they shouldn't be hindered from learning and developing competences. They shouldn't be hindered from participating in shaping the organization or their own jobs. They shouldn't be hindered from bringing their full identities to work, and they shouldn't be exposed to conditions that don't really take into account their current health status, and conditions that undermine their possibilities to avoid both psychological and physical illness. So this is a framework that actually already exists in literature. It's created by Missimer et al. It's mentioned here below. They created the framework in order to make sustainable societies. We are actually arguing that it can be also a useful diversity and inclusion management framework, because we are in the process of doing a literature review in which we show that women and members of other minority groups are still today very often confronted with barriers in these 5 domains. So here you see a section, a few examples of the articles that we identified until now. Like I said, it's research in process, so it could be that we are still adding a few domains, that we are still changing a bit the definitions of the several domains, but this is the basic framework. We think that this framework can be useful in 3 ways, so that it actually can serve 3 types of functions as a diversity and inclusion management framework for organizations. First of all, it can serve descriptive functions, so it can offer organizations a kind of common language in order to be able to describe their situation regarding diversity and inclusion. It can offer also a normative function. What do I mean by normative function? First of all, it can give you, or it gives actually a concrete overview of the domains in which structural inequalities should be removed in order to be able to achieve a diverse and inclusive organization. And secondly, normative refers also to the fact that it maybe can give organizations some new ideas about what types of diversity and inclusion practices can be implemented in the organization in order to be able to achieve diversity and inclusion. And then last, but not least, for me at least, it can also serve a research function. It can make it easier to study and to identify structural inequalities and obstacles that until now remain actually often invisible or unidentified in organizations. So, but how can this framework now be useful for you on the short term? I think it could be interesting to do a small exercise within your company in which you try to identify for each of these 5 domains one action that can be done at the company level and one action that can be done at the individual level in order to identify or to remove barriers in these 5 domains. Of course, if you do this exercise in your company, it can be interesting to do it with a diverse group of employees. I think you will get some interesting input of that. And if you would do this exercise, I'm really interested by it, so please don't hesitate to contact me. The objective of my next few slides is to try to give you already some input, some ideas in how to identify potential barriers in these 5 domains and what you can do in order to remove potential barriers in these 5 domains in your organization. I'm going to just take a bit of water. So let's start with the company level. What do I mean by the company level? By the company level, I mean the systems, the processes, the procedures that are active in your organization. Why is it important to look at these systems, processes, and procedures? I think it's well illustrated by this little figure. So in order to be able to create diverse and inclusive organizations, and in order to make sure that everyone can fit in your organization, you have to be sure that your systems, the processes and procedures that you are using are adapted to that. And if you remark that it's not the case, that they are a bit biased, that they are a cause of inequalities, it's of course essential to revise them. Why would it now be possible that your systems are not always adapted? It's because of the fact that very often the systems that we are using are still dating back from a time in which organizations were very, very uniform, so less diverse than today. So it can be interesting to really have a critical look at these different systems and processes and procedures that are in place in your organization. So what can you do in order to reduce barriers to impartiality at the company level? The lists that I will give here are not exhaustive lists, of course. That would take too much time. So I'm giving examples, but I'm sure that if you would do the exercise, you would find many more possibilities. The first thing that you could do in order to make sure that barriers to impartiality are reduced is first to look at your recruitment procedures. I think this is something that is already done by many companies. For example, you can have a look at the language that you are using in job descriptions. You can also have a critical look at the channels that you are using in order to be able to attract people. For example, are you going always to the same schools in order to attract new starters? Are these schools diverse enough? So that's something that you can look at. Something that is done by some organizations and that seems to work is also to ask people when they, to ask your employees when at the end of a recruitment process to explain why the candidates in the final rounds were not selected. And just the fact that you ask for justification, people are going to think about it and it can help to reduce biases. Remuneration systems can be checked. Of course, it can be interesting to check, that's also logical, to see whether in your organizations there are not systematic differences between groups in the remuneration. And if there are, what is the explanatory factors of these differences? You can also look at promotion policies and procedures. In order to reduce barriers to competence at the company level, you can look at conditions to access employee training and development. You can look at talent management procedures in a critical way and to promotion policies and procedures. That's for influence, in order to reduce influence, in order to remove barriers to influence, of course, it could be interesting to have a look at a critical look at your decision-making processes and to implement employee participation and voice processes for some types of decisions that can be made. Meaning making now. What do I mean by meaning making? It's like I mentioned already in the earlier slides, it refers to the fact that people can bring their full identities to work. And in order to make sure that people can bring their full identities to work and that they use these full identities in their job as well to get things done, it can be interesting to create a culture in your organization where it's clear that experimentation is stimulated and failure is accepted. So it can be interesting to highlight that for the organizational learning process, experimentation and failure are okay. Why is that? So let me first explain a bit what I mean by full identities. Very often, or full identities, I define it or I describe it as the unique characteristics or the unique set of characteristics, experiences, identities that a person possesses. But very often when a person arrives in a new company or in a new environment, that person is going to create like kind of new persona in order, or that they believe that will be successful in that specific environment, in that specific organization. And very often that they are letting go of their unique sets of characteristics in that new persona. And if you create an organizational culture in which experimentation is okay, failure is okay, you really give more room to people in order to experiment a bit with their full identities and to bring their full identities into their work. Oh, I should go the other way around. So in order to reduce barriers to health, if you do everything what I mentioned here, if you look at these different systems and if everything goes well over there, it will already be a big help for the psychological health of many employees. If we think more about the physical health, then it can be interesting to have a disability management strategy, of course, remove environmental barriers. That's very clear. A clear example is the accessibility of building, but of course, in function of the disability that you're dealing with, it can be very different things. Important to remember is also that not all disabilities are visible. So it can be interesting to have processes that really make it easy for people, for employees to disclose about their disability, and then the disability officer that sensitizes, that identifies blind spots, etc. So that's for the organizational level. Like I said, in order to make a diverse and inclusive organization, it's essential to look at these systems, etc., at organizational level. But creating diverse and inclusive organizations, it's a multi-level challenge. It's really not easy. And so it's also really essential to look at the individual level, and it's also essential to develop leaders that have inclusive mindset, and inclusive mindset in both one-to-one interactions and into team interactions. the tips and tricks that I will give in the next few slides are sometimes valid for one-to-one interactions and sometimes valid for team interactions. So what can an inclusive leader do in order to be able to reduce impartiality? That's something that Marianne will talk about more. It's also something that already a lot of organizations are doing, and that's a good thing. It's to develop an awareness about unconscious bias. That's very important. And in order to do that, it's also important to create a very strong self-awareness. But you will get some more information about that later on. In order to reduce barriers to competence, it can be very helpful as a leader to set very clear expectations for employees regarding goals and skills that they have to develop. So then they know what they need to do in order to be, or what they need to be in order to be successful. And then they can create their own path towards that success. Also, something important to be aware of as an inclusive leader is a thing that is called task segregation. Let me give a short example. Imagine that you have a team of women and men. They are approximately doing the same jobs. And as a leader, I give most of the administrative tasks to the women, which are often considered a bit less challenging. That's an example of task segregation. There is also research done in security within a team of security. So in a team of security in the airport, and there they see that the most emotionally exhausting tasks are very often given to women, with as a consequence that they are more in burnout, or that they have more sickness leave, which on its turn has also consequence on promotions, etc. So that's also something to be aware of when you are a leader. Another thing is the bias in feedback. Very often women get feedback that direct them less towards a function that is less towards a senior director function. Of course, these last two elements are also linked to the unconscious biases that we are having. In order to reduce barriers to influence, an interesting tip is, it's a logical tip as well, is to actively seek to understand the points of views and experiences of employees, to try to train active listening skills, which is a very big challenge today with all the distractions that we are having around us. In a team context, it can be interesting to really ask your members to write down their ideas in advance and then go around the table and share the ideas one by one. Meaning making, here I think it's the most special little advice that we can give in order to make sure that people can bring their full identities to work. Leaders can try to embrace their own weirdness, try to become aware of the weird others in the organization that are often very valuable for the organization, but become very often also invisible, and try to seek them out and try to connect more with them. What do I mean by weirdness? It refers a bit to the full identities that I was explaining already earlier. So you have the unique set of characteristics, experiences, identities of a person. The weird aspect of that are those aspects that make the person very different than other people in the team or other people in the organization. It can be very valuable, but it can also have as an effect, that these weird people are feeling a bit alienated. And I think that everyone already experienced a moment where you felt a bit different than the others in a specific context. So as an inclusive leader, it can be interesting to have a look at yourself to try to identify in which moments you felt a bit like that, and it will help you to be better able to identify the weird others in your organization, in your team, and try to be able to connect with them, which will allow them to use their weird aspects in order in their jobs and in the organization. And then health, again, like earlier on, what I said is that if you are doing, again, as an inclusive leader, already a lot of things in these 5 domains or in these 4 domains, it will have already a quite big positive effect on the psychological health of your employees. In order to stimulate the physical health, you really have to make sure that the people have workplace or that the adjustments in the workplace are done in order to make sure that they can work in a normal, positive environment. So that are my main tips and tricks. I hope it gave you already a bit some insights. Again, if you would like to do this exercise, don't hesitate to contact me. If I would like, if you would like to remember two main messages of these presentations, I would like it to be, first of all, that in order to be able to create a diverse and inclusive organization, you should try to, it should be your objective as an organization to remove the barriers for competence, influence, meaning making, health, and impartiality. And secondly, that in order to be able to do that, you should work on several levels. You should work on the individual level, the interpersonal level, and also at the company level. If you do one or the other, it will have less effect, it will be less efficient. Here I put some interesting resources. I only put two because otherwise it becomes maybe too much. This is an article that I didn't talk about, but it's a very interesting article. So I would recommend it to read it. And voila, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. If you want to reach out after presentation, don't hesitate as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Now I actually give the floor to the participants. If anybody has any question for Valerie, you can either write them in the chat, and I'm happy to give it to Valerie, or just indicate in the chat that you have a question, and I'd be happy for you to open your mic and camera and ask it directly too. So I have so far not seen questions, but this is your moment. Maybe everything was very clear, Valerie.
I hope so. Or not at all. That's also possible.
Yes.
I don't have a question, but while I was listening, it rang the bell of analogy from a session that I followed in the frame of Project Madame. When we talk about full identity, it resembles the personalism stream within the philosophy, where like a person is unique, connected and spiritual. So whenever you take into account those three aspects of a person, I think it complements to your aspect of full identity.
And so it's, what did you say, unique?
Unique, connected, and spiritual.
Ah, yeah, okay. Yeah, indeed. It seems to be aligned. That's true. It's very true that in function of the different fields that you are working in, that yeah, you can find things that are worded a bit differently, but that are very linked to each other.
Also a question. How about having the solicitation letters or CVs anonymous? Is that a good way for being impartial?
Yes, there is, if it's possible in an organization, research shows indeed that it helps quite a lot, and that just changing, there is also a lot of research that shows the fact that you have the same site CVs and the same motivation letters with different names, it causes discrimination. So I think it could be a very, if an organization is willing to, it's a good tool. Of course, you cannot avoid, that's always a bit the challenge. You have the CVs, but then you have the interviews, and then, yeah, you have other biases that are coming up. But for a first round, I think it can be very useful.
Mm-hmm. At least when you have a name that's not Flemish, you don't get not selected based
exactly
your name on the CV.
Your name, yeah, absolutely.
And maybe one last question. Do you have any tips on how to break some habits? Because a lot of employers say like, yeah, we are doing it like this since a long time and we are comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's a good, that's more organizational behavior. That's a very interesting challenge. I also think for myself that it's a big challenge. So I understand that it's not always easy. I think a good way to go is to just put a very small objective for yourself. For example, like I said, trying to find the weird others, try to, I think everyone already knows what I'm talking about when I talk about that. And just, I now said for myself, okay, I'm going to try to just start a conversation tomorrow, in the coming week, I'm going to start a conversation, and I'm going to, and so putting those very small objectives and then see that it goes actually very well, then it can help, I think. So just step by step. I think it's a simple maybe tip, but I think it can be effective.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if there's other questions. I haven't seen anything in the chat, but please, I suggest that we move to Marianne's presentation now. But if questions do come up, just give me a sign. Marianne, I would like to give you the floor now. Again, if questions during Marianne's presentation come up, indicate in the chat, and we will pick them up after. So yes, thank you for sharing your screen. And
thank you.
It's yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, because the little story about the meeting today is that we started discussing that with Annelies before COVID. So it's been a moment that we were all waiting for, and now we're doing it virtually. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Annelies, and it's a pleasure to co-lead that also with Valerie. So I'm indeed working at UCB, which is a biopharma company, and what I intend to do today is to shortly indeed explain you what is a vision or ambition with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can already notice here that we have an equity component, which I'll tell you more about. And then Annelies asked me, Marianne, please do some tease out about the unconscious bias. So I will experiment something with you and give you some teasing about, let's say, a partnership approach we have with the Neuro Leadership Institute to raise the awareness of unconscious bias within UCB. So shortly about UCB, indeed, it's a biopharma, it's a mid-sized company. We're very much involved into neurology and immunology. We are headquarters, you know, in Belgium, in Anderlecht. And I've been working there since 7 years. But shortly about myself here, and I will tell you my story. Why? Because I think I would like to make a note about the diversity and also the unconscious bias. And when I'm starting my discussion at UCB, I often start with this quote: diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. I think you can picture yourself, if you need to throw a party, it's kind of easy to say, okay, I would like to have, you know, do those friends at my place. But then it gets more into your thinking about inclusion, how to make sure that everyone has fun in their own ways. And about my story, I'm Belgian. I studied international management, then finance and marketing. And I started to work actually in the US in the banking industry. I'm making it very fast, but you know what? I moved into, in London, still for the banking, moved into Luxembourg in the consulting, then did 4 years in a startup company in the telecom, and it was really the beginning of the text messaging. And so this is where a friend of mine told me, Marianne, we're developing this company and we would like to remind people when to take the medicine. So basically it's what we call in pharma a compliance service. And this is how I get into pharma. And then 4 years later, they had to stop, let's say, this activity because it was very difficult startup with pharma. And for me, I really found the industry I wanted to work, which is the pharma industry. But it was really, really difficult to enter. I was making myself a tier 1 list of companies and a tier 2 and tier 3. And I was getting to the last tier 1 company and I say, it seems very difficult to enter to the pharma. Because indeed of the diversity of my background, I was not what we call a plug and play. I did not have, I was not having the scientific background. I was not a nurse. I was not a sales rep. So it was really difficult to get with such a diversity of background into the pharma. Eventually I managed to. And why now also the inclusion and the unconscious bias? I've been now 15 years in the pharma. And for 15 years, I was always many times starting meeting with a disclaimer. And my disclaimer was, I'm not a scientific background. So basically I was myself putting some limitation and coming with that one. So meaning maybe I was not feeling totally included into that pharma world even 15 years. I realized that now because I've been on that new adventure for D&I since a year. And now I'm stopping saying that, but I really realized that you might have also bias you put for yourself. And this is how hard it is to go with a diverse background and to really feel included when you don't fit into the let's say, the usual suspect that you will find in a company. So that's shortly about me. Now, if I need to go about the story at UCB, we started the E&I journey about 5 years ago. And it started through the grassroots energy of what we call employee resources group. So we had the first women initiative, Women in Leadership. Then we had a group called the Youngster, representing the more young generation. We now have also a group of LGBTQ+. And we now have, because I'm also representing globally since, you know, the discussions also with the recognition of the Black Lives Matter movement, we now have also a group represent the African. And I can tell you from a D&I journey, we're still early on a journey. And I think in the US, it's much bigger and much more fast also in what we do. We had defined at the company level our ambition 3 years ago, and it was endorsed at really executive, you know, CEO level. So for me, it was very good because we had the energy from the grassroots and we had the endorsement from the top, but no dedicated resource. So the first dedicated resource, I used to say, the lucky me, it's only 1 year ago that we had a dedicated resource. I think company of our size normally would have 4 FTEs dedicated to TD&I, so that just show you so the magnitude. And this year we are really accelerating. Why we're accelerating? Because I mean, we are beyond the business case. There's so many data that shows, and I guess you might know, there's so many data that show the value of the E&I. So now it's about a company really fully embrace and embed diversity, equity, and inclusion in how they operate and how they do business and how they behave. And so for me, this year is an important year. And indeed, COVID crisis and also all the discussion about anti-racism has really big an inflection point. So it's not about, you know, whether we need to do it, how we can do that and how we can accelerate our journey. And this is why, following those discussions, because there's really an increasing pressure externally to tackle, to create social impact, but also internally, you know, employees are asking for that and also the future workforce. So this is really our ambition, how we define it. So it's really a culture of inclusion by providing equitable opportunities, and I will mention that, embracing diverse talent, diversity of thought and experiences. So that's, you see already different elements of diversity that we put in the definition to create value for patients now in the future. And creating value for patients, I started with that quote, this is really at the heart of who we are as a company. Now in the future, this is really a link to how we can also create sustainable business. And it's really important that diversity, actually equity and inclusion, along with ethics and compliance, are really seen as foundational pillars and should be part of the DNA of who we are as a company. Now, this quote, because the equity is really new from this year. And so I used to take this quote to mention equity. And equity is different than equality. Equality, you give the same to everyone. And you can see from the pictures what it gives. Equity, and if we transfer that to a company, is making sure that we really provide equitable opportunities to all. It doesn't mean we will provide the same, but we will consider the individual aspiration and objective. And of course, within the remit of what the organization can provide. So that's really, so it's a new concept that we're bringing forward. And why? Because we want to be very intentional about it. And when I say it's new, it's really new for 3 weeks only, which has been endorsed also at CEO level. So just to tell you about the dimensions and how, so we have a broad definition of diversity. And there might be a shortcut, you know, that we see diversity. When I discuss, you know, with friends, colleagues, they say, yeah, it's gender, ethnicity. It's more than that, because background, this is what you can see, but even the background is what you cannot see, the sexual preferences, for example. Here we mention the diversity of experiences. My story is about that. It's diversity of experiences, not easy. So how can we also, as a company, when we talk about recruitment, let's not only look for people that have pharma experience, Let's look for people that have other type of experiences. This is really bring richness to the company. And the diversity of thought. And you know, in companies, maybe you have different type of model. I think MBTI, HBDI, I don't know if you have this type of frame of references with colors where you see a bit more strategy. That for me, it's a nice way to illustrate what could be diversity of thought and being mindful that, you know, maybe I have a preference thinking, but another person has another one. So if we can all be mindful of that and making sure we enrich the diversity, we will certainly also enrich the value we can create. Equity, as you can see here, there's also sometimes a shortcut with pay equity. And right now we see in the news pay equality, which is also different because pay equality is giving the same. No, pay equity is indeed you want to give fair pay to all depending on the person, on the experience and so on. There's many dimensions that come in there and it's different than pay equality. But here for us, it's again, we want to have a broad definition. We don't want to just say pay, we say fair compensation and the total compensation rewards. And certainly I think, Valérie, will also look to what you say, the learning and development objective. Where are we considering where the persons, you know, are setting themselves objective and also supporting the career aspiration. And not everybody, for example, want to become on a leadership level, but how can we be very intentional about that? So if you look at these two, diversity and equity, somehow for me, it's linked, and I will allude to what Valérie presented, to a system. And for me, it's about how can we look at the system and fix the system. I don't think we will totally reduce, I don't think it's possible, but how can we intentionally reduce system inequities we see? So that if we go to the inclusion, and this is more linked to what you were saying with the leaders, Valérie, for us is the mindset. How can we develop that inclusive mindset so that everyone really can come in and feel in a safe environment, can fully participate and express, and therefore can really bring his true self to deliver the best. So that's how we define DE&I at UCB. And like I said, the DE&I somehow, it's a shortcut, but you can see it as a system. And again, I'm referring to value representation. And the I is more to the mindset shift that everyone needs to do, which takes longer, which is taking longer, and I'll tell you more about that as well. For us, we see also it's important that DE&I, and right now we're still very much inward focus on the value we want to create for the employees, but we really see that diversity, equity, and inclusion will bring value to our patients, value for communities and shareholders. I'll give you an example, and we're not yet there, but this is a question we need to ask ourselves. We're developing new drugs. And for example, you know, we're looking at developing new novel treatment for patients with lupus. Patients with lupus, 90% of those patients are women, and in that one, women of colors. So the question is, how can we reflect this specific population into a clinical development programs? So this is a direct, so I would say, business impact. Value for communities. If, for example, I was in the US discussing with some, what we call the sales, the field force, the customer-facing teams. And in Dallas, 60% of the population is Hispanic, so they speak Spanish. Only 4 to 6% of this physicians are speaking Spanish. And then the question to us is, how are sales force representing this community to really create the value for communities? And the value for shareholders, I mentioned also the sustainability. And one of the key pillars for us is in sustainability is providing access to all patients to our drugs. So the question, how can we be also providing equitable access to all the patients? So those are essential questions that we will also see and try to answer while we advance in our DE&I journey at UCB. Moving on to say what are, let's say, the key pillars to support our journey. And you've seen the journey start 5 years ago. And for me, it's a never continuing journey. I think 5 years ago will be there, 10 years ago, we'll talk differently. But basically we have the pillar number 1 and 2 are linked together. One is really the ambition. So where can we really extract the full value internally and externally of DE&I? What should be our basics to fix? For example, gender, ethnicity, and what could be some specific area where we think we can create the most value? Linked to that is the impact. And the impact, why I say it's linked, because it's what is the current pictures of DE&I at UCB through multiple dimensions. How can we make a picture from the D, the E, and the I? And therefore, where can we see where we have gaps? And beyond the gaps, what are the true root causes? Because if we just look at the gaps, we will scratch the surface. What are the root causes? And therefore, how can we look back to the pillar number 1, which is defining where really we want to focus and make a big difference so that we can really shift the needle. The pillar number 2, and therefore we will set also progress and measure. So we're building that. The number 3 is the network. And indeed, for me, it's the job of everyone to work on DE&I. So working with the senior leaders, certainly, working with what I call the grassroots energy from employee resources group, but also local council. Local council is a group also of passionate colleagues across the organization in a specific market that would allow to translate what we aim to do globally at a local level. Because the pictures of diversity, equity, and inclusion is totally different, for example, in the US than it is in UK, than it is in China. So we need to be able to really integrate the local specificities in all those markets. And the pillar 4 and 5, actually, it's really allude very closely to what Valerie was mentioning. There's one which is embedding the D&I mindsets through our people, through the leaders. And indeed, there's a lot of work about the unconscious bias. The other one is how we can look more systematically at the system and looking at starting with the key talent processes, but also later on moving on to where we have big governance, where we take major decisions. And how can we then try to look at reducing the system inequities that we have. Now, this show you, and maybe that's a question that was asked, how to start. And for me, I like to say it's brick by bricks of step by step. If you want to drive change, you cannot change all at once. It's difficult. So let's go really step by step. And you can see some of the bricks that we are putting for ourselves to support those different pillars. And you see one that is highlighted here in orange, which is indeed what I call the inclusive mindset learning curriculum. So this is one of the foundational pillars that we can find in all companies, probably also in yours, where it's about raising awareness. And here I'm going to zoom into what we do about that inclusive mindset learning curriculum. And you can see the word learning curriculum because intentionally we don't use the word training. One of the learning as well there is that you might give a lot of trainings. If you just stay at training, you might become more aware of your bias, but if you don't do anything without it, you might not yield the full result of what you want to reach. And that's why it takes time to learn progressively how to uncover the bias, how to mitigate them, and how to build inclusive habits. So let me zoom now into the inclusive mindset learning curriculum. So we have decided to partner with the Neuro Leadership Institute. And why? Because they've been developing brain-friendly model, really based on the neuroscience, understanding the neuroscience, what's happening in the brain. And the idea here is indeed, the underlying principle is to create new habits, one habit at a time and repeating it, so that you can have enduring changes. And while with them, then we will also somehow develop a common language on how to talk about that within the organization. So it's important now that what we do here is twofold. It is not a one-time training. So we really want to, at first, raise the awareness of what are the unconscious bias and how becoming aware of that and mitigating some of them would allow us to take better business and talent decisions. And then we will also introduce another model, again with the Neuro Leadership Institute, on how to develop progressively new inclusive habits. And the commonalities in these two is indeed the habits, creating new habits, one habit at a time, repeating it. And you can see typically a journey for us, or a learning curriculum will have 4 steps. The first step where you learn about the bias and you take time to assimilate, to understand, to practice, and then we'll do some more coaching. And then we will have another step where we introduce a model on how to create more inclusive habits, and again, we will do some sustainment. So this is, let's say, a typical one, but we really also customize each time the journey towards the specific team dynamics. We try to really favor the in-depth discussion so that it's really beyond a training. I used to say it's really an experience that we want to create for the teams so that it can really resonate for the person and for the team. Now I'm going to present you the model that the Neuro Leadership has been developed and that we are using. I need to say here that indeed this is copyright. So if you are interested and you will receive the slide, you can certainly contact Rose Plumer. And indeed, it's not a model that you are allowed to use for training, but you will have the slide for your reference. So you've seen the quote that I used at the introduction. And here there's another interesting one. Diversity is having a seat at the table. inclusion is having a voice at the table. Bias is why some voices are more heard than others. That's a way that we introduce also bias at the Neuroleadership Institute. And now this is time for small interactions, because I would like to ask you all which hurricane, and maybe you can use the chat, which hurricane are more deadly? You will type 1 if you believe this is female named hurricane. You will type 2 if you believe this is male named hurricanes. And I will give you a small hint. Normally, the name of the hurricanes, they're giving each time, one time woman, one time man, one time woman, one time man. So now, please go on the chat and type if you believe female hurricane are more deadly or male hurricane are more deadly. And I need to see if I can have the full view here. How can I see the chat?
There's a button on the bottom next to share screen.
Ah, it's here. Hang on, because I'm on. It's up there. Yeah, it's here. Here, part. Should I be here?
I see a lot of ones.
You see, okay, you can help me out. You see a lot of ones. You see a
Yeah.
lot of ones. So maybe you can help me here, so that I stay on this.
Ones I see somebody saying 3 equal as well.
Okay, so we have some creativity here. Yeah, good.
I see 2 twos.
Okay.
I also see a comment, the gender of the name doesn't represent the deadliness in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So the majority is 1, there's some equal, there's some male.
Okay, so the research shows indeed that female named hurricane are more deadly. So the truth is 1, but why is that so? Who wants to try to give an explanation why female named hurricane are more deadly? And Annelies, I will continue to tell me what are the comments. Why is that female named hurricane are more deadly?
Yes, I don't see comments right now, but somebody who wants to speak up, feel free to unmute and switch on your camera.
I'll have a go, Marianne.
Hello.
Well, I know that it's only recent that this exchange of male and female is like a constant exchange, and before that, all hurricanes, I think, were named female because of their destructive force. And at a certain point, somebody said, "Okay, we need to change this, and we need to do male-female." Has that something to do with it?
So that previous part I didn't know. I think the research really looked at when it was a time of rotating, and even for the same strengths. So the reality is that when people heard a female name, they don't prepare as fast and as much to escape, because unconsciously there's a connotation that it will be less strong, less severe. So they don't escape. That's what the research is telling us. And when we do that, actually, at UCB, we also ask a question. Now that you know that, do you think you will escape rapidly when you hear a female man the same way or not? And because we don't have the time, I can tell you many times people say, yes, I will not do that. Of course, you know, I'm very clever, intelligent. Well, the thing is that that's exactly the thing about unconscious bias. This is unconscious bias. Hold on, because I'm just going to move this, sorry. Unconscious bias is really, oops, sorry, I was going too fast, is the default and unconscious way of brain process information. So it's unconscious, so we don't realize it. And default, it's really the automatic way we operate. And most of the time it's useful for us because that's the way we operate. But that's exactly what's happening. So what we learn here also with the Neuroleadership Institute is that first we need to accept that we have bias. And if we have a brain, there's a catchphrase that say, if we have a brain, then we're biased. Then we need to label them and tell you why, and then we will learn on how to mitigate. Why we need to label them? because there's about 150 bias. It's very difficult to know all those ones. So what we have done and what Neurology has done, they have simplified a model, and they came with what they call 5 categories of bias. And for each of the category, you will have a specific strategy on how to mitigate. And it's a teasing. I can tell you normally this is a training we give in 4 hours or 8 hours. So you will have a teaser of 5 minutes. So the first one is indeed similarity bias. Similarity bias, the catchphrase here is people like me are better than others. So basically what's happening in a brain, we rapidly, when we see people, we rapidly put people in group or out group. And we tend to be more favorable when we have information received from the people closer to us in the in group. So that's one of the bias that is taking place. The experience bias, here if it's really right to me, it must be true. So it's really when we take decision, we had a lot of information, there's a cognitive overload, and our brain is trying to help us, and then is making some shortcuts. And that's exactly what's happening. With experience bias, you can retain shortcuts that we're making, and bias might be playing out there. The third one is about experiences. My perception are accurate. It's really that intimate belief, that, I do know it. It's good for me, and I know I have the intimate belief that, I know the truth. And that's where the experience bias is coming in. The distance bias, here they say close is better than far. So it's what's happening. It's really the proximity network in our brain, that where we tend to favor something which is close to us in time or in physical space. So think, for example, so meeting, when you do virtual meetings, and I don't know if you have that, of people that are close to you, it will be easier. So you might have bias. You might be maybe tempted to give a task to someone that is close to your office than someone that is really further away. This is where distance bias might be playing out. And then the safety bias is really linked also to what's happening in your brain with the threat, as human being, animal, we're always looking for threats. And so basically here, for example, we will need twice again to assess the potential loss of something. So we are really sort of risk adverse. So this is similarity, experience. And then how to mitigate these? For similarity bias, you remember this is in-group, out-group. So try to look and focus on the commonalities. Try to bring the people in the out-group into your in-group by look at creating common goals and focusing on commonalities. For the experience bias, you remember this was the shortcut. So there it's really the idea, slow down and paint really the complete pictures. For important decision, don't go too fast in making the decision. Take time to slow down and have the full picture. For experience bias, it's really when you say, okay, I know it's true, I know my experience is good. Try to get other perspectives. Try to indeed enrich a perspective from others so that you will break out those potential bias. On the distance bias, and remember here it's okay, normally you tend to favor when it's closer to you in physical space and time. Try to take the distance out of the equation. For example, recruiting someone. Between the choice of a person that is available now and a person that is available in 6 months, remove that notion of time and think of the person. Imagine that they're both available now. This is a way to remove the time in the equation. And on the safety bias, this is when we are risk adverse, then they say try to decide for someone else, or you could also imagine, okay, the decision has been taken. Put yourself, I've made the decision. How do you feel? So those are small ways, and in a very rapid nutshell, on how to break bias and how to categorize the biases. And this is an example of work that we are doing now on a team basis at UCB. So again, here, the principle is to accept first that we're biased, to be able to label them, and then once you label them correctly, then you can find the right mitigation strategy. I will hand my talk here today, that indeed diversity for me is very inclusive is a choice. And I think with that choice for me maybe key words, some words to retain is, let's be mindful of what DE&I means so that we can be more intentional about all the actions we are taking one another and within our own organization. Thank you very much, and happy to take on questions. So I will stop sharing, right?
Yes. Thank you very much, Marianne. So now again, the floor is to the participants. Feel free to formulate your questions. I have in the meantime seen also 2 questions for Valerie, but let me, I see one for Marianne, so let me first dive into that one. From Artemis, from Blenders, I am very happy that UCB adds equity to D&I, but I have a question about the goal that you pursue with equity. We saw the slide of the wall and people trying to peek above it. Equity then would have the goal to find elements to build piles so that all people could peek over the wall. But isn't it time for the goal of equity to be set higher? Not to focus our energy on finding elements to make a pile, but focusing our energy on destructing the wall. So in the short term, it might be good to spend energy on finding elements to build piles in order for everyone to peek over the wall. But in the long run, we should focus on destructing the wall altogether. For employers, it might be interesting to weigh how much energy and resources to spend on piling elements and how much to spend on destructing the wall. It might just be more efficient and more impactful to set destruction of the wall as a goal from the beginning on.
Yeah,
not saying that building piles is not good.
Yeah, no. I think it's a fair point, but for me, this is, at this stage, still very inspirational. I think at this stage, if already we could really make sure that as a company, every leaders could be much more looking at the individual person and trying to really encounter the aspiration, the objective, because removing the wall, there's also a lot of element happening in the society. And I was debating a lot, and I'm going to have a lot of debate at UCB because this is a new concept. But for me, a big success would be if every leader could already be very, like I say, mindful of what D, E, and I means, and therefore be intentional about the action is taking. I would say I would be very successful. I would say I've been successful. Removing totally the wall, it's very inspirational, and I know there's another cartoon that shows that. But then there's also, I think, a big element also of the society that needs to come into play. And this is where can you really influence? And I think for me, let's start with influencing our own organization. Then it will also spread to the bigger organization, the bigger society. But I agree with the aspirations there.
Yeah, and maybe very quickly before we split into groups, also for Valerie, the questions, one on how to, a lot of recruitment processes don't take into account the foreign profiles. How could HR adjust their hiring policy to give those HR people the right tool to be able to evaluate uncommon profiles? And maybe at the same time also, because it seems to be linked, that a lot of recruitment departments focus their limited time on high potential talents and who are seen as the main drivers for performance. How could that be? How could you adjust that?
Yes, 2 interesting questions. I don't know whether I have the right answers to them. The question regarding the high potentials, is it the right way to go? Of course, ideally, but I know it's a bit idealistic, but ideally organizations should put more resources in the diversity and inclusion. If you're really serious about it, I think it's also important to be able to put resources in it, because otherwise it won't work. But I know in these times, in general, it's not always easy to get. Of course, it's also understandable that you put time and energy in high potentials. What I would recommend there is then to really look at whether your there is no bias in your talent management procedures, like I mentioned in the system, in order to avoid barriers to competence. One of the things that you can look at is if you decide as a company, okay, we want to focus on high potential and only on a restricted number of people, that you really check then whether your talent management procedure and your promotion procedures, whether there are not biases in the criteria that you are using to identify the high potentials. So to make sure then that you have a critical look at these procedures if you choose that you only focus on the high potentials. On the other way, I think, like Marianne also said, I think not everyone in the company has the objective to become a leader, but still wants to develop some competences, some wants to learn a bit about something specific in their job. And I think that should be also made possible without, so that you don't leave out that group of people that don't want to become a leader, but still want to develop in the job that they are doing. I don't know whether it's a clear answer. And then the first question, I'm going to retake it. First of all, indeed, one of my clients told me, don't confuse incompetence with malice. I completely agree. What we see also is very often that, it's not easy to implement diversity and inclusion in an organization. And I don't say that the fact that it doesn't always happen, that it's because of bad intentions, that I don't want to say that. There are still a lot of research that has to be done in order to be able to know what is efficient. And so how could our HR adjust their hiring policy to give those HR people right to be able to evaluate uncommon profiles? I think first thing is indeed to, what Marianne told, the biases, that's the first thing. Like Artemis already suggested, the CVs that are anonymous, those are specific tools, but I'm not an expert in the hiring policies, so I'm not going to give you, I'm not going to be able to give you a very complete or concrete answer, but if you want to, I can have a look and try to give a more complete answer based on research later on. Voilà.
Okay, I'm just being mindful of the time. Let me just ask one more question to Marianne, and the other questions coming in, we will, I'm happy to distribute then afterwards via email as well. But there's a question from Bernard from VPost to Marianne. Which are the supporting KPIs to measure the impact that you are working on?
So I would say right now we have, let's say, scattered data analysis and type of KPI. We might have some in talent acquisition, recruitment, and not perfect. We are building that. So one of the key projects, I'm happy to come in 1 year time and hopefully give some progress on that, because the key project we will build for next year is developing indeed what we call a DE&I index for us, and also what I would say a leadership dashboard. Because we have the general KPIs about gender, and for me this is not actionable enough. So what we intend to develop is really some leading and lagging indicators at corporate level, also leading, linked to our sustainability. But then for me, I would like to develop what I call a leadership dashboard, so that every leader is managing a team can have a look from a data, and that reflects really the DE&I dimension. And remember the background, what are the proxy measures, so that every leader can have a good view, what is my DE&I footprints and where do I want to go? I saw a question about quotas and so on. It's very difficult. I'm more at this stage right now towards a progressing zone, I would say at the team level. And of course you can aim for certain quotas at the corporate level. So we are in the building of a more holistic picture, because right now we have different type of initiative that are scattered across the organization and the different countries. But so happy to report on that in a year time frame. Hopefully I have some good progress.
Okay, we'll keep you up on that. Thank you very much. It's already an interesting discussion. As I said, I will distribute the other questions via email. But now we would really like to hear from you. So we will split up in 4 groups for about 10 minutes to discuss the challenges that you're facing while implementing an inclusive organization culture in your organization, as well as the key enablers to overcome those challenges. So you will have 10 minutes to discuss, and then automatically you'll be catapulted back into the main room. You all also have, once you are in the breakout rooms, there's an option on the bottom right, basically to leave the breakout room and go back to the main room if you want. But if there's an issue or a problem, but otherwise you will automatically come back into the main room. So I'm posting the questions in the chat right now, so you should be able to see those also in your breakout room. But obviously in each room there will be either Valerie, Marianne, my colleague Gael Janssens, who's on the line, or me to facilitate the discussion as well. So Eglantine, my other colleague, can I ask you to split us up? Thank you.
We are back.
Yes.
Sorry, Rob, we had to cut the discussion.
No problem, no problem.
Okay. Let me see, Eglantine, everybody's back? Yes.
Yes?
Yes, well, it seems like it.
Sure.
Yeah, but the room is closed now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I hope you had some interesting discussion. It would be great to hear from maybe first Marianne to just in 1 minute, what was the main challenges and enablers in your group?
And feel free to jump in. I will try to summarize that. Indeed, there was a lot of discussion about diversity and inclusion. For me, it's really how both are included, because there was a question, it might be easier to attract diversity, but how do we make sure that, you know, do we really keep the diversity? So inclusion, this is where it comes to inclusion. And then there was a lot of questions from Rob and no particular, let's say, cases, but how do we really enlarge the pool and make sure that we really, you know, we can attract diverse talents? So there was a lot of discussion. So it really challenged, like, and then in there was like, okay, it's the hot potatoes. Who is the accountability? Which we ended up, for me, it's the accountability of money. It's not just HR, it's not a general HR thing. So it's the accountability of money, because it's so complex and intertwinkle, and you cannot cut it. I think the coins image, you know, diversity, inclusion, you need to have both together. So that's why, but feel free to jump in, guys, if I did not summarize correctly the conversation.
Okay, otherwise I would like to go to Valerie to hear from your group.
Yes, it was very short. It went very quickly, but the main challenges that came up in our discussion were actually the fact that the male-dominated fields, that it's a bit difficult. So the STEM and more transportation fields, that it's difficult to create, yeah, diversity and inclusion there, and that's not always easy. That were the main challenges. Also, the fact that the sustainability field is still very wide, and that's also very difficult to attract people from different origins. That there the gender diversity is okay, but there it's more difficult to attract people with different cultural backgrounds. That were the two main challenges. And then we started talking about the solutions, but then it ended a bit. And one of the solutions that was mentioned, I think it's also something that is often considered as a very positive solution, is the role models, the use of role models in organizations. And yeah, voilà, that's a short summary. And if someone wants to add something, don't hesitate from my group.
Okay, I also would like to go to Gael maybe now, because yes.
Yeah, thank you. We identified the challenge as first the sponsorship of the business, so the management, who it's hard sometimes to get the management having this topic high enough on the agenda. It's not a priority, especially in Corona time. Also in companies where a lot of people are already alike, it's really going out of your comfort zone to be diverse. So it's also quite difficult to bring those people to, it's a big cultural change. In some big organization, also there is a decentralization of the recruitment process. So everyone is recruiting in, it was at the VUB, so every professor is recruiting, so it's not having a structural, it's difficult to make a structural change. Also, sometimes when you are a multinational, you can have strong regional culture, well, multinational in many countries, I mean. And also the inclusive culture reflects a little bit the polarization that we already see in society. In the key success factors, we see, of course, to bring the management with you. Sometimes be patient, right? Wait for the right time and the right person to have with you, but also try to get external expertise. Also to make them curious about others and about the topic. If you have so small networks that already exist in your organization, try to make them stronger, to make them more visible. And we had one book, which is Zero Exclusion, about diversity, and one game, serious game about diversity. It could help also.
Okay, thank you very much. In my group, we some of the challenges that came up were where can we find people with diverse backgrounds seems to be a challenge in the recruiting, but also how to deal with different languages in a team, in a company, in an organization. Those were the main challenges that we discussed. In terms of solutions, we talked about is your job description, is it inclusive enough? And check that and test it maybe among students or among people in your network. But also what is key is to adopt a common language. Obviously English comes up when we have that discussion. So to accommodate those different languages. And in terms of recruitment, I think it was Isabella who said, fish, where are the fish? Basically, where can we find them? Well, don't just wait for people to come to you. Go to those places where, or to those networks where you find people with diverse backgrounds in terms of people with disabilities or people with migration backgrounds. So those were some of the main challenges and solutions that we discussed. So thank you very much for sharing your perspectives. I know we're running out of time, but I hope that some insights of other participants may have sparked your interest and could also help your implementation. Feel free to contact me in case you're looking to connect with another member. I'd be happy to facilitate that. Before we finish, I would like to allow me to introduce two more initiatives. One is that the Shift, together with Verso and Minderhedenforum, is actually launching a broad partnership to increase inclusion on the work floor in Flanders. We're bound with subsidy limits there, but the two objectives of the partnership are really to increase the ability to implement inclusive cultures in organizations, and the other is to guide job seekers to employment. And we'll be setting up boot camps where there will be journeys of group sessions and individual coaching sessions for organizations who are really interested to develop their action plan, to fine-tune their action plan, and really take this change this concretely in your organization. The bootcamp will also allow you to gain insights by experts, learn from each other, from peers, give you tools. We are currently setting it up. Actually, today we're launching the partnership. I have to run to the kickoff meeting after this. So the bootcamps are still being developed. And it's for the next 2 years, so it feels like a nice concrete next step after these inspiration sessions. So you will definitely, I will communicate about it, and you will definitely hear from that in the coming weeks and months. And then another tool I would like to mention is, I see Isabella is still here, is the handbook from Jump on how to build an inclusive workplace. Isabella, maybe you briefly want to explain that. You'll do it better than I, because it may be the perfect tool for your organization as well.
Yes, it's very easy. You can download it on the website. I will put the link in the chat. But it's a 30 pages handbook where you really have practical tips on how to deal with an inclusion journey, really transforming the culture of your company. And it's very important to assess beforehand, to assess what kind of culture do you have, because in any kind of culture, you don't have a neutral culture anywhere. So there are insiders, so people that have more privileges than others, and you have outsiders, and it's very important to know who these people are in order really to change, to be inclusive, to be diverse, and to have more equity, like Marianne was saying. It's a wonderful word, being fair and equitable.
Okay, thank you very much. I also will send the link afterwards as well.
Okay, great.
So now it's time to close today's webinar. Thank you very much. Our following session will be focusing on a specific target group of people with migration background. The event will be organized on November 26th, I'm sorry. Please pencil that in and you will hear about it. So now the only thing left for me to do is to thank you for your interest and participation today, all your insights, and I'm really looking forward to welcome you again in a future session. So I wish you a great day. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.